Leticia Stauch will never leave prison alive, but what is happening to her behind those walls may be far worse than execution. Colorado's most secure women's prison, a place where protective custody means 23 hours a day alone, where silence replaces conversation and time becomes the weapon used to break the mind. The woman convicted of murdering her 11-year-old stepson now exists inside a system forensic psychologists describe as psychological dismemberment, where identity erodes piece by piece and everyday compounds the damage of the one before. There are no crowds, no noise, only concrete steel, and an endless routine that never changes, and Leticia Stauch will remain trapped inside that environment until her final breath. This is the true story of Leticia Stauch's life in protective custody inside Colorado's maximum security women's prison, a sentence that reads like a mathematical impossibility: life without parole, plus 30 years plus 18 more stacked so high she would need multiple lifetimes to complete them. But those numbers are not the real punishment, because the real punishment began the moment the cell door closed. Leticia Stauch was convicted of killing 11-year-old Ganon Stauch. The violence was deliberate, prolonged, and extreme. His body was concealed, transported across state lines, and hidden while his family searched desperately for answers, and in the aftermath she lied repeatedly to police, the media, and to Ganon's father, constructing a web of deception that held the nation's attention. What awaits Leticia inside is not simply confinement, it is a slow psychological collapse that unfolds gradually with no release, only time. By the end of this video you will understand why experts consider long-term protective custody one of the most devastating punishments ever created imaginable. To understand Leticia Stauch's present reality inside Colorado's maximum security system, we have to return to the morning everything began. January 27th, 2020, a bitterly cold Monday in Colorado Springs. At the time, Leticia was 36 years old. She was married to Albert Stauch, a member of the Colorado National Guard who was stationed out of state. She was living alone with his children in a quiet suburban neighborhood called Lorson Ranch. 11-year-old Ganon Stauch and his teenage sister trusted her completely. To them, she wasn't just a stepmother. She was the adult responsible for their safety. That morning, Leticia claimed Ganon left the house to visit a friend. According to her, he simply never came home. Hours passed. Evening came, and only then did she contact authorities to report him missing. She told investigators Ganon had been playing outside and disappeared somewhere within the neighborhood. What followed was a massive community response. Search and rescue teams flooded the area. Hundreds of volunteers knocked on doors. Dive teams searched nearby reservoirs. K-9 units combed through fields and wooded areas. Flyers went up across the city. For days, Colorado Springs held its breath, hoping an 11-year-old boy would be found alive. But almost immediately, investigators noticed something wasn't right. Leticia's account of events kept shifting. Her timeline changed. Details were added and removed. And then security camera footage from a neighbor's home revealed something devastating. Ganon was seen getting into Leticia's pickup truck that morning. He never exited on his own. Hours later, the truck returned. Observers would later note it appeared to be riding lower, as if carrying additional weight. When confronted with the footage, Leticia offered new explanations. First, she claimed Ganon had been injured during a candle accident inside the house. Then she said he had been hurt while playing with a gun. Each version contradicted the last. As days passed, Leticia's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She sent frantic messages to Albert, Ganon's father, claiming she was cooperating fully with police. She appeared on local news broadcasts, crying and pleading for Ganon's return. But behind the scenes, investigators were quietly tracking her movements. On March 4, 2020, nearly 6 weeks after Ganon vanished, Leticia was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. She had fled Colorado, crossing multiple state lines. 2 weeks later, the worst fears were confirmed. On March 17th, Ganon's body was discovered beneath a bridge in Florida, stuffed inside a suitcase. The medical examiner's findings were horrifying. Ganon had been stabbed 18 times. He had suffered blunt force trauma. He had been shot once in the jaw. The injuries indicated sustained violence, not a single impulsive act. Evidence showed the attack occurred inside his bedroom. Cleaning agents had been used. Blood had been concealed. The crime scene reflected calculation and awareness. The digital trail told the same story. Internet searches conducted before and after the murder revealed concern about homicide charges and forensic evidence. Receipts showed purchases of cleaning supplies, trash bags, and carpet cleaner within hours of Ganon's death. A storage unit had been rented. GPS data traced Leticia's path across the country as she disposed of evidence along the way. Every piece fit together. Leticia Stauch's trial began in March 2023, more than 3 years after Ganon's murder. What unfolded inside that courtroom was chaotic. Leticia pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Her defense argued she suffered from dissociative identity disorder, claiming an alternate personality named Maria committed the murder while Leticia herself had no control or memory. Psychiatrists testified. Reports were presented. The narrative suggested fragmentation of identity and psychological collapse. The prosecution dismantled it methodically. They showed planning. They showed intent. They showed deception before and after the crime. They replayed Leticia's media appearances. They highlighted her changing stories. They demonstrated awareness, not dissociation. During proceedings, Leticia repeatedly disrupted the court. She interrupted witnesses, accused prosecutors of misconduct, claimed the judge was biased, accused her own attorneys of conspiring against her. Ganon's biological mother, Landon Hyatt, took the stand. She described the agony of waiting, the unbearable uncertainty, the moment hope died. She looked directly at Leticia and said she would never forgive her. Albert Stauch testified through tears. He spoke about trusting Leticia with his children, about Ganon's kindness, his humor, his dream of becoming a YouTuber someday. Ganon's sister testified she heard strange noises that morning. She said she had been suspicious almost immediately. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of tampering with a deceased human body. Guilty of tampering with physical evidence. Guilty of child abuse resulting in death. Leticia showed no visible emotion as the verdicts were read. She stared straight ahead. On May 19, 2023, sentencing took place. The judge described acts of grotesque evil. A betrayal of a child who called her mom. A complete absence of remorse. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional decades stacked consecutively. Symbolic or not, the outcome was clear. Leticia Stauch would never walk free again. She was 39 years old, and she was about to be sent somewhere designed to make sure time itself became the punishment. After sentencing, Leticia Stauch was transferred out of the county system and into the custody of the Colorado Department of Corrections. There was no dramatic send-off, no crowd, no cameras waiting at the gates, just paperwork, restraints, and silence. From that moment forward, her identity ceased to exist outside an inmate number. She was no longer a defendant, no longer a headline. She was simply someone to be processed and placed. Her destination was the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility in Ganon City. It is the only maximum security prison for women in the state. Opened in 1968, it houses approximately 400 inmates across multiple custody levels. Murderers, violent offenders, women the system deems too dangerous or too vulnerable to be housed elsewhere. But within that prison exists another layer, one that very few people ever see: protective custody. Because Leticia murdered a child, and because that child trusted her, she could not be placed in general population. In prison culture, crimes against children carry the highest risk. Inmates convicted of harming children are often assaulted, sometimes killed. Protective custody exists to prevent that. On paper, it is meant to keep inmates safe. In practice, it creates a different kind of sentence entirely. Leticia was placed into that unit almost immediately. There was no adjustment period. No gradual transition. One day she was in a courtroom. The next she was behind a reinforced door designed to remain closed. Protective custody at the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility is built around separation. Inmates are housed alone in single cells. They remain there for 23 hours a day. Every day, 1 hour is allotted for recreation, but even that is done alone. No group programs, no shared meals, no communal work. The logic is simple. No interaction means no opportunity for violence. But it also means no opportunity for connection. Correctional officers escort inmates in full restraints anytime they leave their cell. Hands cuffed to a waist chain. Ankles shackled. 2 officers minimum. Hallways cleared. Doors opened and closed in sequence. Movement itself becomes an event, not a right. Everything is controlled. Everything is observed. There are no prison jobs in protective custody. No classes. No therapy groups. Educational programs are unavailable. Even religious services are limited or conducted through a door. Time does not move forward here. It repeats. Meals arrive through a slot. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. The same rotation of food every few weeks. The same tray. The same silence. Medical appointments occur under heavy escort. Showers are scheduled and taken alone. Phone calls are restricted, monitored, and often denied altogether. Visits require special approval. For someone convicted of murdering a child, those approvals are rare. Most days pass without Leticia hearing her name spoken out loud. The cell itself is small, roughly 8 by 10 feet, concrete walls, a metal bed frame with a thin mattress, a combined stainless steel sink and toilet, a narrow desk bolted to the floor. There is no window to the outside world. Only a reinforced glass panel in the door. Light comes from overhead fixtures that switch on and off according to a schedule she does not control. From inside the cell, sound becomes distorted. Voices echo through ventilation shafts. Doors slam somewhere down the tier. Occasionally someone screams. Leticia cannot see who, cannot speak to them. They exist as disembodied noise. Other human beings reduced to echoes. International human rights organizations have long warned about conditions like these. The United Nations defines prolonged solitary confinement as isolation exceeding 15 consecutive days. They classify it as a form of psychological torture. Studies have consistently shown that long-term isolation leads to hallucinations, paranoia, cognitive decline, emotional instability, and loss of impulse control. The brain, deprived of stimulation and social feedback, begins to turn inward. Forensic psychologists describe the process as gradual disintegration. Memory becomes unreliable. Time loses structure. Identity begins to erode. Without interaction, the mind fills the void. People report hearing voices, seeing faces that are not there, reliving memories as if they are happening in the present. The line between thought and reality weakens. In women's prisons, the effects can be more severe. Correctional consultants note that female inmates often rely more heavily on social bonds to regulate emotion and maintain mental stability. Remove those bonds and the psychological collapse accelerates. Silence carries weight. Isolation becomes physical. This is the environment Leticia Stauch entered in her late 30s. There was no exit plan, no scheduled review. Protective custody is not a temporary measure when the risk never diminishes. Child killers do not become safer over time. The threat follows them until death. From this point forward, her life would no longer be measured in years, but in repetitions. The same door, the same walls, the same hour of movement, over and over. The court had issued the sentence, but the environment would decide how it was carried out. And the environment was designed to outlast her. From inside that cell, days stop feeling distinct. Morning does not arrive with sunlight. Night does not bring rest. The lights switch on and off according to a schedule Leticia does not control, and over time the body stops trusting its own internal clock. Hunger comes when it comes. Sleep fractures into shallow pieces. Dreams bleed into waking thoughts. This is not chaos. It is something quieter and far more damaging. Monotony. Correctional staff familiar with long-term protective custody describe it as an erosion rather than a collapse. There is no single breaking point. Instead, something small disappears each day. A memory becomes fuzzy. A thought loops longer than it should. A voice seems to speak when no one is there. The mind searches for stimulation and begins to create it. Human beings are social by design. Neurological studies show that social interaction activates the same regions of the brain responsible for emotional regulation and cognitive stability. Remove interaction and those systems weaken. Prolonged isolation produces brain activity patterns similar to physical pain. Over time, the absence of feedback causes the brain to misfire. Reality becomes negotiable. Inmates in long-term isolation frequently report hallucinations. They see family members standing in the cell. They hear conversations through walls that are not happening. They lose the ability to distinguish between memory and imagination. Some begin speaking to themselves out loud. Others retreat inward completely. The world shrinks to the dimensions of the cell. For Leticia, the psychological risk is compounded by her own history. During trial, she claimed dissociative identity disorder. The jury rejected it, and rightly so. But prolonged isolation can produce genuine dissociation even in previously stable individuals. Identity fragments not because of trauma alone, but because the mind lacks anchors.
No mirrors. No social reflection.
No external confirmation of self. Outside prison, identity is reinforced constantly. Someone calls your name. Someone responds to your words. You exist because you are seen. In protective custody, that feedback disappears. Leticia is not addressed by name most days. She is moved, federal locked, unlocked. Her identity narrows until only one label remains: inmate. Former prison ministers who worked in isolation units describe a consistent pattern. Inmates stop thinking in future tense. Hope requires variation. It requires milestones. In isolation, tomorrow is identical to today. There are no achievements, no progress, no meaningful change. Time stretches but does not move. This is why many experts argue that isolation produces suffering without insight. Contrary to popular belief, it does not encourage remorse. It does not foster reflection. It overwhelms cognitive resources. Survival becomes the only task. The mind focuses on enduring the next hour, then the next. Moral reckoning requires mental space. Isolation removes it. For decades, Leticia will exist in this state. She was 39 at sentencing. If she lives to 75, that is 36 years. If she lives to 85, that is 46. Death row inmates often wait 10 to 20 years before execution. Leticia will exceed that time and continue. There is no countdown, no end date, just duration. Some argue this is justice, that the suffering fits the crime. Ganon Stauch was 11 years old. He trusted her. He was stabbed repeatedly, shot, hidden, disposed of like an object. His future was erased. His mother will never see him grow up. His sister will carry that absence for life. His father will live with the knowledge that he brought the person who killed his son into their home. At sentencing, Ganon's mother said Leticia stole everything her son would have been. Graduation, love, adulthood, dreams. She said she hoped Leticia would feel a fraction of that pain. Many victims' families express similar wishes. They want suffering to mirror loss. But the justice system does not explicitly sentence psychological disintegration. It sentences years. It sentences conditions. What happens inside those conditions unfolds quietly, without oversight, without public attention. Leticia's mental deterioration will not be televised. It will not be reviewed annually. It will simply happen. When Leticia eventually dies, whether from illness, age, or the cumulative toll of isolation, there will be no resolution. No lesson learned.
No rehabilitation achieved.
Only a record showing she was contained until the end. Her story exposes something uncomfortable about modern punishment. We claim to value human dignity, even for the worst offenders. Yet we maintain systems that erode the mind by design. Protective custody is framed as safety. In reality, it is endurance. It keeps the body alive while the self deteriorates. Whether Leticia deserves this fate is not the question. Her guilt is settled. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdict was just. The question is what her daily existence reveals about how society handles those it deems irredeemable. We do not simply remove them. We isolate them until time finishes the work. Letecia Stauch will never walk free again. That was decided in a courtroom. But everything that follows was decided by walls, schedules, silence, and repetition. Punishment not delivered in a moment, but stretched across decades. Not by execution, but by environment. Not with violence, but with time. And time, unlike death, does not end suffering, prolongs it. So why is Letecia Stauch's prison life worse than death? Because death is final, it's an ending, a release. What Leticia faces is not an ending, it's an endless loop. Wake up in the same concrete cell, eat the same rotating meals, hear the same distant voices echoing through the vents, take the same solitary walk in the same concrete yard, return to the same cell, lie down on the same metal bed frame, repeat tomorrow and the day after and the day after that for decades, the same walls closing in the same isolation, pressing down the same routine, stripping away pieces of who you were until you can't remember what it felt like to be a person, and through it all the ghost of Ganon Stauch, the 11-year-old boy who trusted her, who called her mom, who died terrified and in pain, whose future she stole. This is her forever silent, unchanging, deeply psychological, no escape, only time. Letecia Stauch is 40 years old. If she lives to 80, she has 40 more years in that cell. Ganon Stauch would be 16 years old now. He should be in high school. He should be making YouTube videos. He should be alive. What do you think? Is Leticia's sentence justice or something darker? Does life in protective custody isolation constitute a fate worse than execution? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, consider supporting the channel by liking the video and subscribing for more in-depth examinations of cases that expose the hidden consequences of punishment and power. Our next video will explore how long-term isolation reshapes the human mind and why so many incarcerated women deteriorate behind closed doors. Until next time, this is Court of Secrets, reminding you that behind every headline there's a human story far more complex than it first appears inside prisons.